Ethan always perceived himself as separate, an outsider within the walls of his own home. His mother Eleanor and his stepfather Richard hardly seemed to notice the boy who excelled in every practical pursuit he undertook. In contrast, their constant praise for his stepsister Chloe, a vibrant, artistic spirit, only deepened the chasm between them. From an early age, Ethan became painfully aware of the unspoken hierarchy within the family, where artistry and charm reigned supreme, while academic achievements went largely uncelebrated. Eleanor had envisioned a life filled with glittering accolades for an artistic daughter, and Ethan, as the only child from her first marriage, unfortunately became a bittersweet reminder of her unfulfilled dreams. "You could learn so much from your sister, Ethan," she would often remark, juxtaposing his pragmatic interests against Chloe's more flamboyant creations. He could almost hear the echo of disappointment in her voice, a constant theme that played in his mind like an old record stuck on repeat. Whenever he received a congratulatory pat on the back for his impressive grades or accolades in STEM competitions, it always felt like a mere whisper, drowned out by the loud applause reserved for Chloe's less-than-stellar art shows. Chloe wielded her effortless charm, like a fine instrument, thriving in a limelight that felt foreign to Ethan. Even her failures, an artist's block or a poorly received project, seemed to draw sympathy and admiration, while Ethan's hard work went overlooked. In many ways, it was as if he had been conditioned to remain in the background, to support the family's golden child, and that realization sparked within him a quiet resentment that lingered just beneath the surface. Chloe leaned into the role bestowed upon her, her creativity spilling over as she flitted in and out of various art programs, each one met with praises from Eleanor and Richard. They encouraged her to chase her dreams, often directing the family's finances toward her artistic endeavors. Meanwhile, Ethan fought to earn his place, grounding himself in academics, dreaming of one day making a significant impact. When he overheard his distant aunt mentioning Eleanor's wish for a daughter who embodied artistry, Ethan could not shake the feeling that he had fallen short of the expectations placed upon him, a disappointment long before he had even uttered a word in this world. As time passed, the favoring dynamic grew more apparent, pushing Ethan deeper into the shadows. His stepsister was not only an artist, she was a social butterfly, beloved by every family friend and relative, while Ethan remained merely the studious boy, a role lacking any flair. Every accolade he garnered felt like a shadow of what Chloe achieved with less effort. He found himself ceasing to celebrate victories that he once held dear, every award transformed from a source of pride into a reminder of his solitude. Chloe, for her part, wielded her charm like a weapon, indirectly practicing manipulation. She would paint herself as the struggling artist seeking validation, prompting their parents to encourage Ethan to lend assistance. "You should be more understanding, Ethan. Your sister needs you," they would urge. The caretaking urge, which often directed Ethan's thoughts of familial duty, became a pressure, one that he bore silently, attempting to dismiss his feelings of being overlooked. Inside his head, a storm brewed, swirling with thoughts of inadequacy and reckless ambition. He was, in fact, excelling in a field that promised a future, yet not a single soul around him acknowledged the weight of that achievement. Instead of competing with Chloe for parental affection, he quietly pursued success in computer science, raking in prestigious scholarships, yet he remained the invisible man at family gatherings. Contrastingly, Chloe occupied the center stage, acclaimed for her creations, deserving or not. She claimed her identity as the visionary artist, thriving in a world that adorned her with titles and praise. Ethan wondered, however, at what cost. As time would tell, both their paths would diverge, chasing separate fates, but it would be the unbraced expectations of their childhood that would eerily tether them together, even in their divergence. A sense of acceptance grew within Ethan, although tarnished by threads of resentment, that would become more pronounced as life unfolded. It became clear to him that while he was nourished by knowledge, Chloe thrived in the warmth of praise and affection. The dance of their lives had just begun, unwittingly choreographed by their parents' preferences, and it would not be until much later that Ethan would truly begin to discern the worth of his journey, in isolation, yes, but in self-discovery as well. His silent battles were just as significant as Chloe's applauded victories, and it was those very battles that would set the stage for a very different life ahead. As Ethan settled into the aftermath of his college graduation, he felt a wave of pride wash over him. Yet for every ounce of pride he harbored due to his hard-earned accomplishments, there was an unshakable bitterness rooted in disappointment, particularly with his family. Having recently graduated magna cum laude from a renowned engineering program, Ethan had co-developed a promising open-source project that not only received industry attention but also positioned him as a rising star in the tech field. He had secured a highly coveted position at a startup, marking a significant milestone in his life. His parents had even been spared the financial burden of his education, thanks to the scholarships he had earned. But instead of the celebration he had envisioned, an outpour of joy and pride from Eleanor and Richard, he found himself at a small gathering that felt strangely hollow. The living room, adorned with balloons and banners, intended for celebration, displayed a celebratory facade, but the mood was far from festive. Ethan's big day quickly became secondary to Chloe's artistic endeavors. Eleanor and Richard spent the majority of the evening animatedly discussing Chloe's upcoming gallery debut, a small exhibit at a local co-op, while Ethan stood awkwardly to one side, receiving fleeting congratulations that seemed encompassed in obligatory niceties. The disparity between Ethan's accomplishments and Chloe's mediocrity left him feeling disheartened, but unwilling to voice his feelings in that moment. He had long battled the internalized belief instilled in him from childhood that his achievements were overshadowed by Chloe's artistic flair, often praised by their parents for her gentle spirit and creativity that came so effortlessly to her. In stark contrast, Ethan's achievements in STEM and practical pursuits felt marginalized, rarely celebrated or discussed with genuine enthusiasm. Unlike the abundant praise showered upon Chloe, who never seemed to struggle in the spotlight, Ethan felt invisible, an afterthought in the very family he sought to impress. Despite the sting of neglect, Ethan remained determined to carve out his identity. The few congratulations he received did not energize him as they should have. Instead, they reminded him of a subtle yet potent truth about his familial dynamics. The undercurrent of their conversations, while seemingly innocent, felt like a quiet dismissal of his worth, almost as if they were absolving themselves of their son's accomplishments to lavish praise on Chloe for her perceived struggles. In the months leading up to his graduation, he had begun to brace himself for this kind of neglect, preparing mentally for the moment when his achievements would fade into the background, eclipsed by Chloe's artistic pursuits once again. Yet here was another opportunity, squandered, a chance for his parents to acknowledge his hard work and dedication in a competitive environment. The haunting echoes of comparisons were more vivid now than ever, as they struggled to connect Chloe's emotional roller coasters to the practical successes Ethan had achieved. While he envisioned a heartfelt celebration, he found himself listening to his parents rave about their daughter's artistic struggle. They translated her feelings of uncertainty and the difficulties of being an artist into a narrative that was as familiar to him as it was frustrating. "You should be proud of your sister," they urged him repeatedly. "She has such a unique perspective, you could learn some valuable lessons from her." This intermingling of regret and sibling rivalry within a supportive web only tightened its grip on him. Every remark about Chloe's artistic sensory violence snowballed into an overwhelming suffocation of acknowledgement in his mind, drowning out the quiet successes he had achieved over the years. Chloe's mediocrity, routinely applauded as authentic and deeply moving, stood in stark contrast to Ethan's triumphs, which were often met with polite enthusiasm. As his friends gathered to celebrate their individual milestones, he felt burdened by expectations that carried echoes of insincerity, the need to smile through the pain of rejection. After a week of pushing through the discrepancy between their narratives, Ethan graduated without the genuine pride he fervently sought from his parents. Instead, the graduate stood there, feeling as if he were awash in indifference, overshadowed by the visionary path they had crafted for Chloe. The accolades he had long worked for felt diminished to mere numbers, mere achievements, flickering shadows of muted applause that could not reach the heart of the matter. While he attempted to navigate the conflicting landscape of familial expectations, Ethan noticed a growing divide between his professional life and his home life. Internally, he began to disconnect from the narrative that had long dictated his worth in relation to his sister's perceived effortless charm. He secured a competitive position at a startup, marking a new beginning in an exciting career. Yet in the days after graduation, rather than basking in the glory of newfound opportunity, he found himself once again grappling with the realization his family would continue to prioritize Chloe, The following weeks solidified his feelings of isolation. In meetings and internships, Ethan thrived, quickly rising through the ranks and impressing colleagues with his innovative ideas. His world began to expand outside the constricting walls of familial expectations. Yet unbeknownst to him, the scars from his emotional upbringing would resurface as echoes of resentment continued to follow him, shadows never allowing him complete solitude even amidst the thriving career he was building. As Ethan focused tirelessly on his career, he could not shake the deep-rooted belief instilled in him by his family. To achieve was to survive, but acceptance would always elude him. He often found himself questioning the very essence of what it meant to be proud of his success, when the proudest moments seemed to diminish against the backdrop of his family's attention. A struggling artist perpetually celebrated over the accomplished engineer. Little did he know that the distinguishing line between success and acknowledgement would soon wane to a breaking point, setting the stage for the decisions he would have to make in the pursuit of his own self-worth. In the days following his graduation, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The mixed emotions, a cocktail of pride and disappointment, reached a fever pitch that he could no longer ignore. He had just completed a monumental chapter in his life, one filled with sleepless nights, endless projects, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. But instead of the expected celebration and validation from his family, he was met with indifference. It was as if his achievements, rather than illuminating the paths of familial pride and joy, had become mere footnotes overshadowed by the narrative delightfully spun around Chloe's artistic pursuits. The day after his graduation marked a particularly painful moment. Eleanor and Richard, buoyed by an almost giddy excitement, excitedly disclosed their plans for an extravagant trip to Europe, a journey they intended to embark on with Chloe. This trip was not just a vacation. It was positioned as an inspiration getaway for Chloe's undisclosed artistic struggles, a means of cultivating her creativity abroad. The sight of their jubilant faces filled with anticipation as they discussed galleries and renowned artists in context, cut through Ethan like a knife. This was not just a vacation. It was a glaring reminder that despite his undeniable success, he was still just a background character in his parents' grand narrative. Ethan watched his mother meticulously check off items on a list planned for Chloe's journey while he sat in stunned silence on the couch. His presence felt more like an afterthought, an interruption to the joyous planning rather than an integral part of the celebration. A hastily scribbled note was placed in front of him, accompanied by a pithy gift card to a local bookstore. The juxtaposition of their celebratory plans and his mere token acknowledgement became the final straw. It summarized years of emotional neglect in a single moment, the culmination of a lifetime spent yearning for parental recognition, a pursuit rendered futile in the light of their unequal affections. The absence of any genuine acknowledgement struck him deeper than he had imagined. How could he continue thriving in a world where the metrics of success felt inherently measured against the less tangible yet consistently celebrated struggles of a sibling? Chloe, whose art took the form of impulsive inspiration and emotional outbursts, was the family's cherished darling, capable of igniting a river of praise and admiration at each breath she drew. Ethan felt invisible in comparison, always working hard yet never quite the center of attention. With his heart heavy and determination ignited, Ethan steeled himself for the decision he had avoided for far too long. It became painfully evident that if he were to pave a path toward emotional independence, he needed to sever the ties that bound him to a family structure that had long relegated him to the shadows. He could never truly flourish if he continuously sought validation from parents who seemed incapable of recognizing his accomplishments. In a moment of lucidity, he accepted the tech job offer from the startup located in another city. It was a move driven not merely by his professional aspirations, but by the desperate need to restore his sense of self-worth beyond the confines of familial approval. The departure felt symbolic, a rebirth from the ashes of years of being overshadowed and invalidated. This was more than just a new job. It represented a radical pivot in his life, a stepping stone toward creating a narrative of his own choosing. The move into a shared apartment with old college friends felt electric. Everything was new, his surroundings, his interactions, and most importantly, his outlook. As he settled into his new routine, the energy of the city resonated with him. He felt the strains of familial expectations dissipate with each passing day. Ethically immersed in the tech landscape, he was learning, innovating, and advancing, free from the constant comparisons and painful reminder of his family's neglect. However, the distance did not change the patterns he had lived through as a child. When contact with his parents persisted, distant calls, shallow exchanges, it became painfully clear that his absence meant little to them. The first call he received from Eleanor 2 months after the move was not to check in on him, but rather a plea for technical assistance with a malfunctioning printer and their home Wi-Fi. The conversation remained revelatory, showing just how disconnected they truly were from his life. This shallow engagement only solidified Ethan's resolve. With each interaction, he became increasingly aware that nothing would change unless he took a firm stand. The phone calls that once ignited hope were now mere reminders of year-long estrangement, a disconnection he had craved and paradoxically feared. Ultimately, it was the culmination of years of feeling second best, a malady of favoritism that would no longer have a place in his life. Ethan was ready for the uncertainty that lay ahead, navigating a landscape where he could forge his own identity in the absence of his family's shadows. The world outside felt vibrant, a cacophony of possibilities that breathed life into his ambitions. As he focused entirely on his new role in the professional world awaiting him, he often struggled with the remnants of doubt and disappointment. Still, he knew he was free to live outside the script written for him by a family he had long believed would never truly understand his worth. It was time to write his own story, and in doing so, embrace the potential of what awaited him. As Ethan settled into his new life, he felt the weight of his past gradually lifting. The bustling city, alive with innovation and opportunity, enveloped him in its energetic embrace. Each day was a blank canvas, and he was the artist, painting his own future with vibrant strokes of ambition and achievement. The tech startup where he now worked buzzed with creativity, and he felt a sense of belonging that had long eluded him within the confines of his childhood home. Despite the exhilarating change, Ethan often found himself reflecting on his family. The distance he had created between himself and his parents was not just physical but emotional too. Life in his independence was a stark contrast to the strained dynamic he had experienced growing up. The success he had achieved was palpable, yet it was tinged with the bitterness of unacknowledged neglect, a shadow that lingered despite the brightness of his new beginnings. While Ethan thrived professionally, the lack of genuine contact from his family weighed heavily on him. Despite his monumental accomplishments, graduating magna cum laude from a prestigious engineering program, receiving awards for his open-source project, and earning a prestigious position at a thriving tech startup, communication from his mother, Eleanor, and his stepfather, Richard, was scant. The occasional impersonal text during holidays seemed to serve more as an obligation than a genuine connection. Ethan learned about significant events in Chloe's life through distant relatives and mutual acquaintances. The news of her engagement to an older real estate investor came as a bittersweet surprise. He felt a mix of disinterest and empathy. Chloe appeared to be stepping into a life defined by material comforts, yet he sensed that beneath the polished surface of her curated existence lay the same emotional vacuity that had once dominated their childhood experiences. The balance of gratitude and resentment danced within him. He was free, while she remained emotionally tethered to their parents' approval. 3 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Ethan's life in the new city was a growth story. He had established a comfortable apartment with a view of the skyline and surrounded himself with a network of friends who supported him. The tech scene stimulated his intellect, providing both challenge and camaraderie. Long gone were the days of feeling like an afterthought. He had transformed his narrative from that of the overlooked son to a thriving professional whose contributions were recognized and valued by colleagues and friends alike. The lack of communication from his parents remained a routine he had grown accustomed to, even embracing the silence that punctuated their interactions. However, deep down, a flicker of unresolved emotion thrived: anger, disappointment, longing, a typical cocktail for those who have navigated the choppy waters of family dynamics. The longing for a connection was buried but never extinguished, often resurfacing in quiet moments when he reflected on what family meant to him. Then a distant cousin reached out with urgent news that would change everything. This cousin, a rare bridge between Ethan and his estranged family, called to inform him that their family home had suffered extensive damage from a sudden fire. Richard, who had always been steadfast in his belief in self-sufficiency, allowed their homeowner's insurance to lapse years ago, leaving them completely vulnerable. The gravity of the situation hit Ethan like a sudden gust of wind. They had lost so much, and yet it felt almost surreal. His initial instinct was to empathize with their plight. After all, they were still his parents. Despite the emotional distance, he couldn't help but feel a pang of responsibility. He paused, contemplating the generous man he had aspired to be. Yet as the details unfolded, the weight of years of emotional neglect surfaced alongside a renewed clarity. They had always managed to look past his struggles, focusing instead on Chloe's artistic dilemmas and validating her perceived victimhood. Their neglect of his accomplishments, and more importantly his emotional needs, began to crystallize as he processed their demands for assistance. It was clear that they had always viewed his successes as secondary, while placing the responsibilities of their failures squarely on his shoulders. Would he truly offer financial support to those who had dismissed his worth for so long? Should he step in to alleviate their pain, or step back to protect his hard-won sense of self? Ethan felt a powerful internal struggle. He weighed the prospect of offering help against the reality of having lived most of his life as an emotional backup plan for his parents. Their patterns of neglect tugged at the edges of his conscience. Could he really be the one to stabilize them after years of being an afterthought? In undertaking such an obligation, had he risked delusion or mere foolishness? It became clear that their crisis would not be one he could shoulder alone. The familial bonds he had forged in his independence had grown stronger than those tied to blood. His friends, his colleagues, these connections were rich with validation, respect, and mutual support. They represented relationships built on ethics, empathy, and shared endeavors. Ethan knew that making a decision was not just about what he could offer. It was about recognizing what his parents had failed to provide throughout his life. Would he extend his hand, or would he learn to let go for good? As thoughts swirled within him, Ethan felt a sense of mounting clarity come into focus, a choice on whether he would respond to a family history that had largely been shaped by disappointment or carve a path forward illuminated by independence and strength. As Ethan settled into the reality of his decision, a profound sense of liberation washed over him. He had spent years trapped in the shadow of a family dynamic that stifled his identity and transformed him into an emotional punching bag. The clarity that came with his choice to distance himself provided an uplifting counter-narrative to his past. His journey from isolation to empowerment had been challenging, but every step had enriched his understanding of self-worth and independence. The quiet streets of his vibrant new neighborhood became a canvas for his evolving life. He dived deeper into his career, relishing each new project that showcased his engineering skills. His colleagues celebrated his success. Friendships flourished based on trust and mutual respect, unlike the conditional affection he had grown accustomed to with his family. The seeds of self-confidence he had sown began to blossom into a life he had long envisioned, one where his worth was determined solely by his own standards, not by the opinions of others. However, the calm was disturbed when a message arrived unexpectedly from his cousin. Ethan stared at the screen, a sense of dread creeping in as he processed the content. It conveyed the news of a family crisis that would compel him to confront his unresolved feelings. The distant cousin informed him that his parents had faced a devastating loss. Their home had severely burned in a fire, leaving it uninhabitable. The news struck Ethan with mixed emotions. Part of him felt compelled to rush to their aid, while another, more resolute part reminded him of the years of emotional neglect. Eleanor and Richard had inadvertently set the stage for this moment through their reckless choices, including allowing their homeowner's insurance to lapse and mishandling their finances. Their burdens were not solely the consequences of fate. They were manifestations of years spent dismissing Ethan's achievements in favor of Chloe's artistic whims. They wanted support, but Ethan had long ceased to view himself as the responsible fix-it man for their lives. He recalled how they had failed to recognize his sacrifices and the struggles he had navigated for recognition and connection. In this moment of reflection, a deeper understanding began to materialize within him. Their crisis represented not merely a chance to offer help, but also a clear reminder of the destructive familial patterns he was striving to break. He had spent so long trying to earn a place in their hearts, yet the unfortunate events in their lives would not rewrite the narrative of his own. Empowered by this realization, Ethan ultimately decided to maintain his emotional distance and decline their request for financial help. In the days following his firm decision, the calls from his mother and stepfather increased in frequency, their voices filled with desperation. Eleanor's tearful pleas for family solidarity fell flat as Ethan stood by his choice, feeling a newfound peace in his independence. She painted herself as the victim of circumstance, resorting to guilt trips that had once weighed heavily upon him. Richard, upon realizing Ethan's stance, escalated the confrontation, naming him cold and heartless, and throwing the threat of disownment like an empty dare. Yet as Ethan listened, he felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. The words that once held so much power over him simply echoed his own liberation. Their relationship had been tenuous for years, strained by unspoken resentment and favoring parental affection towards Chloe. The truth was, he had already severed ties long ago. It was merely a matter of formal acknowledgement now. He was no longer willing to be the family scapegoat, the one who upheld their facade of success and perfection, all while his own identity crumbled in the background. In the aftermath, a distant cousin reached out once more with shocking revelations about the circumstances surrounding the fire. The blaze was likely ignited by outdated electrical wiring that Richard had neglected to replace, coupled with reckless financial decisions that had drained their savings for Chloe's artistic explorations. The foundation of his parents' crisis did not lie with a stroke of fate. It was a culmination of their own irresponsible choices. Ethan's sense of vindication grew, mingling with relief for reaffirming his decision. He understood now that he was responsible for his path, independent of the expectations of others. Through this experience, he had discovered that family was not merely defined by blood but by the connections that enriched the human experience. He had the power to craft his narrative, transforming pain into resilience, molded by self-acceptance rather than familial approval. The reverberations from the fires of his past no longer held him captive. They instead fueled his motivation to seek and cultivate relationships grounded in authenticity and mutual growth. In breaking free, he found something profound, an understanding that embracing one's individuality does not equate to abandoning relationships, especially those entrenched in toxicity. He could now choose to forge his own path, grounded in love and respect, surrounded by friends who truly saw him. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the trials of Ethan's life. If you found his story resonant, I encourage you to reflect on your own relationships. Are they supporting your growth, or are they holding you back? Family does not solely consist of blood ties. It can also be found in friends and chosen communities that honor your journey. If this narrative has inspired you or made you think deeply about your own family dynamics, please give this video a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from it as well. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel for more compelling narratives and discussions that explore the complexities of life, relationships, and self-discovery. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message that we all have the power to redefine our paths. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.